Here is the story of Sean O'Malley, an immigrant's tale. A tale as old as America. One of many faces with the same dreams and aspirations. His is a story woven by experience as well as heart, courage, and resilience. As well as faith. But first, your humble narrator would like to elucidate you with how this story came to pass into his hands. It was a yarn woven over a life and brought back by Sean's progeny, a son, who would later move to Liverpool. Passed down generations, your narrator first heard the story on his father's lap and is proud to now tell you this immigrant's tale. Sean's story begins in the year 1830, nestled within the emerald green hills of County Kerry, Ireland, in the village of Glenmore. Glenmore welcomed a new addition to its poor and humble community that crisp, sunny spring March morning when Sean O'Malley entered the world, born of Mary and Patrick O'Malley, devout Catholic Irish tenant farmers who had long toiled the fertile land passed down through generations. As the first cries of the newborn son echoed through the thatched cottage, Mary and Patrick beamed with pride, cradling the tiny bundle of joy in their arms. As Sean would tell the tale in his later years, even the local leprechauns came out to see him. The news of Sean's arrival spread swiftly throughout the village, greeted by neighbors with hearty congratulations and warm embraces. The family welcomed the whole village to greet their new arrival as a fiddle played and the Guinness was poured in celebration. The parish priest, Father O'Malley, Sean's cousin, said a prayer and gave his new cousin a blessing. It was Father O'Malley who would later baptize young Sean into the faith. Glenmore, with its cobblestone streets and whitewashed cottages, buzzed with excitement as villagers gathered to celebrate the birth of the newest member of the tight-knit community. For Sean's parents, his birth represented not only a continuation of their lineage but also a beacon of hope for the future, a future filled with promise and possibility. From the moment he entered the world, Sean O'Malley's presence was felt far beyond the confines of his family's homestead. His infectious laughter and boundless curiosity endeared him to all who knew him, setting the stage for a life destined for adventure and discovery. But amidst the tranquility of rural Ireland, the winds of change were stirring, foreshadowing a journey that would lead young Sean far from the familiar comforts of home and into the unknown depths of the new world. As a young boy growing up in the tranquil village of Glenmore, Sean O'Malley embraced the simple joys of rural life with an infectious enthusiasm. From the earliest hours of dawn, he could be found scampering through the verdant fields and wooded glens that surrounded his family's cottage, his laughter ringing out like a chorus of songbirds in the morning air. Life in Ireland held a deep connection to the land, where the O'Malley family tilled the soil and tended to their modest homestead as they did from time immemorial. Patrick, Sean's father, was a resilient man with weathered hands, an infectious grin, something he passed on to Sean, and a heart rooted in tradition. Patrick imparted the values of hard work, community, Catholic Christianity and a reverence for the land and all creatures to Sean from an early age. Mary, Sean's mother, was a devout and friendly woman of some import to Glenmore, a strikingly beautiful young woman with familiar ties to all the way back to King Brian Boru himself. It was from Mary that Sean learnt compassion and fortitude, as well as the love for the spoken and written word. It was she who taught Sean how to read as a young boy. A must for any O'Brien. Sean's childhood was filled with the laughter of family gatherings, the warmth of peat fires, and the spirited tunes of traditional Irish music. With each passing season, Sean's connection to the land deepened, as he eagerly assisted his parents, Mary and Patrick, in the daily rhythms of farm life. From tending to the family's livestock, one young goat and a single lamb, to helping sow and harvest crops of potatoes and cabbage, Sean relished the sense of purpose and belonging that came with working the fertile soil passed down through generations. Despite the demands of farm work, Sean found solace and joy in moments of leisure, spending hours exploring the rugged hillsides and babbling brooks that crisscrossed the countryside. His love for nature was matched only by his passion for reading and storytelling, and Sean was partial to Charles Dickens' famous essay, A Modest Proposal, teaching him both satire and a larger view of the world. Sean eagerly listened to the tales of local legends and folklore spun by the elders of the village around crackling hearth fires. That is, from everyone but old Lady Macready, who didn't believe the tall tales of banshees or leprechauns until one night in 1840. As she told the story, she was woken one night by what she thought was the howls of the wind, only to see the apparition of a banshee in her window, pointing to her husband. The next morning, old Lady McCready was a widow. As he grew older, Sean's thirst for knowledge led him to pursue a basic education at the village schoolhouse, where he eagerly absorbed the teachings of his teachers and reveled in the camaraderie of his classmates. Yet, even amidst his studies, Sean found time to be an altar boy, help his mother with the sewing, and tend to his 3 younger siblings, Catherine, Michael and Annie, when he wasn't tending the fields or exploring the countryside. Sean would often visit old Lady McCready after school, helping her around her modest home for a few coins and her fabled stories of life in Scotland before her and her late husband moved to Ireland, as well as her insights into Protestantism. Sean wasn't sure what he enjoyed more, her tales or her tea or the occasional biscuit. Sean would also help Molly, an Irish beauty of some 18 years, through any endeavour she'd ask of him. Molly was the best ceilidh dancer in all of County Kerry. In the golden light of adolescence, Sean's heart stirred with the inklings of young love, as he found himself drawn to Molly and green eyes as beautiful as the morning sun. But Molly was older than he, and their courtship was merely in his imagination. Sean's first love blossomed amidst the idyllic beauty of Glenmore, their stolen moments together a precious respite from the toils of farm life and British oppression. But as the shadow of unrest descended upon the land, Sean's carefree days were soon overshadowed by the harsh realities of life, things that his parents Mary and Patrick could no longer hide from Sean. Little did he know that his world was about to be turned upside down, as the winds of change swept him from the tranquil embrace of his homeland and into the tumultuous currents of history. In the golden light of a crisp autumn morning, Sean O'Malley ventured out into the fields surrounding his family's humble cottage in County Kerry. The air was crisp with the promise of a new day, and the fields stretched out before him, bathed in the soft glow of the rising sun. As Sean worked his way through the rows of potato plants, his heart swelled with pride at the sight of the bountiful harvest that promised to sustain his family through the coming winter. But as he reached down to pluck a potato from the earth, his fingers closed around something unexpected, a small, misshapen tuber with a sickly pallor that sent a shiver down his spine. Pulling the potato from the ground, Sean's heart sank as he beheld the rot and decay that marred its surface, a grim harbinger of the devastation that was to come. Hurrying back to the cottage, Sean cradled the spoiled potato in his hands, his mind reeling with fear and uncertainty. Bursting through the door, he found his parents, Mary and Patrick, hard at work preparing the morning meal. With a heavy heart, Sean laid the rotten potato before them, his voice trembling as he recounted the discovery that had rocked their world to its core. As Mary and Patrick gazed upon the spoiled tuber, their faces pale with shock and disbelief, a sense of dread settled over the room like a shroud. They knew all too well the implications of what they were seeing. The blight had come to their doorstep, as it had too many a doorstep before them, bringing with it the spectre of hunger and hardship that would engulf the land. In the days that followed, the news of the blight spread like wildfire through the countryside. Sean and his family watched helplessly as their once vibrant fields withered and died before their eyes. The potatoes that had sustained them for generations now lay rotting in the earth, their hopes and dreams reduced to dust by forces beyond their control. Luckily for them, the O'Malleys still had some cabbage, but it wasn't going to be enough to get all of them through winter. As the Great Famine descended upon Ireland with a merciless fury, Sean and his family were faced with a stark choice: surrender to despair or fight tooth and nail for survival. With courage born of desperation and love, they chose the latter, standing together in solidarity against the tide of adversity that threatened to consume them. Little did they know that their trials and tribulations in the coming years would test their strength and resilience to the very limits. But for now, as they gathered around the hearth fire of their cottage, Sean and his family clung to hope with all their might, determined to weather the storm that raged outside their door. As the cold air of autumn descended, so too the howls of the wind. But it wasn't a howl that stirred emaciated Mary that night from her bed. 'Twas but a whisper. It was late October, and the children were fast asleep, all but Sean, who snuck out of bed to frantically finish carving the face of Jack-o'-lantern on his unsuspecting and recalcitrant turnip for sound. Sean was a relatively patient boy, but not for turnips. Then, something caught his attention. He heard something and rushed to his parents' bedside to see his mother staring at the window. It was she that was to be visited by a banshee that night, but no screams, only whispered solace came from the banshee's lips that night. When Mary slightly turned to see Sean behind her, she glimpsed his gaze. For he had seen the banshee too, and he and the banshee were locked in a stare that lasted no more than a moment. Then the banshee turned to look at Mary once more, the banshee bowing her head and dissolving into nothingness. Then she was gone. Sean and Mary then shared a look of understanding and love before they embraced. It was the last warmth of a mother's embrace Sean would ever have. Mary was dead of starvation by morning. But before she died, she told Sean to be a good boy so that he may find her in heaven. With as warm a smile as he could ever remember, she lay him down to sleep. In the bitter grip of the Great Famine, tragedy descended upon the O'Malley family with a cruel and unrelenting force. In the year 1845, as the blight tightened its grip on the land and hunger stalked the countryside like a silent spectre, Mary O'Malley, the heart and soul of the family, a proud descendant of Brian Burrow, succumbed to the merciless grip of famine. As the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, casting a pall of grey across the landscape, Sean O'Malley awoke to the sounds of tears and sobs echoing through the stillness of the cottage. Disoriented and groggy from sleep, he stumbled from his bed to find his brothers and sisters huddled together, their faces streaked with tears and grief. With a sinking feeling in the pit of his stomach, Sean turned to his father, Patrick, whose silent anguish hung heavy in the air like a shroud. Bent over and dejected, Patrick sat in the corner of the room, his fists clenched tightly around his mouth as if to stifle the cries of anguish that threatened to escape. In that moment, Sean knew that the worst had happened, something that would forever change the course of their lives. With trembling hands and a heart heavy with dread, he approached and tried to comfort his father. Through tear-stained eyes, Patrick O'Malley delivered the devastating news. Mary, beloved wife and mother, had passed away in the night, her body, but not her spirit, broken by the relentless onslaught of hunger and deprivation that had ravaged their land. In the cruel calculus of the Great Famine, she had become another tragic victim of a catastrophe beyond their control. As the reality of their loss sank in, Sean and his family were consumed by a profound sense of grief and despair. Mary's absence left a void in their lives that could never be filled, her laughter silenced and her love extinguished by forces beyond their comprehension. In the days and weeks that followed, as they laid Mary to rest in the hallowed earth of their ancestral homeland, Sean and his family vowed to honor her memory by carrying on in her stead, drawing strength from her indomitable spirit and unwavering love. But as they stood beside her grave, their hearts heavy with sorrow, they knew that their lives would never be the same without her. For, beneath the idyllic surface of rural life, economic challenges and the constant threat sustained from centuries of British rule cast shadows over the O'Malley family and their community. The repercussions of historical events, including the Great Famine and the impact of British policies on Irish landowners, weighed heavily on Sean's family. Not wanting to be a burden on his family, another mouth to feed, and the limited opportunities and economic hardships caused by the British, Sean started to contemplate a path less travelled, one that led across the Atlantic to the promise of a new beginning. The decision to leave Ireland was not taken lightly. The whispers of emigration echoed through the village, and tales of newfound opportunities in the United States reached Sean's ears. The allure of a land where one could escape the shackles of economic hardship and forge a destiny of their own making resonated deeply with the young man. The vision of America, a land of possibility and hope, fueled Sean's dreams and eclipsed the uncertainty that lay ahead. In the quiet moments before departure, Sean stood on the emerald shores of his homeland, absorbing the haunting melodies of the Irish winds and the timeless tales etched into the landscape. With a heavy heart and more than a single tear in his eye, he bid farewell to the familiar hills and the embrace of family, carrying with him the dreams of a better life and the weight of generations of Irish resilience. The decision to leave Ireland was a poignant chapter in Sean O'Malley's life, a chapter that would unfold on the shores of a new world, where the echoes of Celtic heritage and the spirit of a young Irishman would find a place in the evolving narrative of the American dream. On Sean's 16th birthday, with a heavy heart and a determined spirit, he bid farewell to his family and the only life he had ever known in the beautiful yet bereft village of Glenmore. As he embraced his siblings for what felt like the last time, tears mingled with smiles, and silent promises passed between them. Though the ache of leaving weighed heavily on his soul, Sean knew that this journey was necessary for the hope of a better future, and, as the older brother, it was he who should leave first to ease the way for the siblings that might follow. He hugged his father and promised him that it wasn't to be their last. A man of few words, Patrick sobbed uncontrollably, both for Sean and for his beloved Mary. But Patrick was happy for Sean and more than a little guilty for feeling relieved for his lightened burden. Sean could feed himself now. Not that it was Patrick's fault for the situation they now faced, and like he did the year before, Sean comforted his father. And, much like Mary did with Sean, Sean smiled to his father, a knowing smile, and bid farewell as he stepped out of his boyhood home's front door and into the wider world. Setting out before dawn, Sean traversed the rugged terrain of County Kerry with a sense of purpose driving him forward. With a small bundle of belongings slung over his shoulder, Sean set out with a heavy heart and a resolve forged in the crucible of grief and hardship. It wasn't long before his footsteps echoed against the cobblestone streets of his beloved Glenmore. The familiar landmarks of his homeland faded into the distance behind him as he forged ahead, his footsteps echoing against the rocky paths and winding roads that stretched out before him, a ribbon of uncertainty and possibility. It was a pilgrimage of sorts, a quest for hope and redemption in a world ravaged by despair. Each step carried him further from the familiarity of home and deeper into the unknown expanse of destiny. As he walked, Sean was consumed by a whirlwind of emotions, fear and uncertainty mingled with a flicker of hope that burned brightly in the depths of his soul. Though the road ahead was fraught with danger and uncertainty, he knew that he could not turn back, not now, not ever. He read the words etched in the arrow along the road. This way to Dublin. The 9-day journey to Dublin City was without incident. He was thankful for the money that he had saved since he was 12 from the odd jobs he did for Fiona McCreed. That is, most of it was saved. Some he had already given his father and mother the year prior when they first felt the pangs of hunger of the blight. Sean walked from sun up to sundown and would only rest for a daily meal at one of the pubs that dotted the road. At night, he'd sleep rough under the stars. He met a few fellow pilgrims along the way and was glad for the crack and conversation. His story was a common one along the Dublin road. Sean had enough to get him to Dublin and then to America and only a few shillings left over. Through mist-shrouded valleys and sun-dappled forests, Sean pressed on, his determination unwavering in the face of adversity. With each passing mile, the landscape shifted and changed around him, a kaleidoscope of colors and textures that mirrored the tumultuous journey of his own life. On the last night of the journey, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the stars began to twinkle overhead, Sean finally reached the outskirts of Dublin, the bustling heart of Ireland's capital city. With weary limbs and a heart heavy with anticipation, he made his way through the labyrinthine streets, guided by the distant glow of lamplight and the hum of activity that echoed through the night. Arriving at the bustling port of Dublin, Sean beheld the majestic silhouette of the Garrick, a towering ship that loomed like a beacon of hope against the darkened sky. With a sense of awe and wonder, he approached the vessel to purchase his one-way ticket, his heart pounding with excitement at the prospect of the journey that lay ahead. Tomorrow would begin the next leg of journey aboard the mighty Garrick. Tonight, a bath, a meal, and a bed. But the bed could wait. Despite his exhaustion, Sean walked around Dublin, his first and probably last time in Ireland's capital, and enjoyed, to a point, the lively rhythm of Dublin. It was the Great Famine after all, and he had to leave the fair city in Ireland because of it. He found an inn and rested for the night. He slept like a log. A long journey will do that to you. And as he would soon discover, he'd need the rest for the next leg of the journey. Sorrow gone, Sean woke up with a bounce to his step, a smile on his lips, for today, he was heading for America. His new life had begun. Or soon would. Sean started the day with a prayer and an early mass before a full breakfast and made his way to the quay. He boarded the ship with a mixture of trepidation and exhilaration and felt a surge of adrenaline course through his veins as he set foot on the deck. The salty scent of the sea filled his lungs, mingling with the cacophony of voices and the rhythmic thud of footsteps that reverberated through the ship. As the Garrick set sail into the inky expanse of the Atlantic Ocean, Sean O'Malley stood at the bow, his eyes fixed on the horizon as he embarked on the adventure of a lifetime. With the wind in his hair and the promise of a new beginning on the horizon, he knew that the journey ahead would be fraught with challenges and obstacles, but he was ready, more ready than he had ever been before, to face whatever fate had in store. As Sean O'Malley stepped aboard the ship bound for America, he was met with a scene of chaos and commotion. The Garrick, known colloquially as a coffin ship, due to its cramped and dismal conditions, was packed to the brim with weary travelers seeking refuge and opportunity across the Atlantic. Below deck, the air was thick with the scent of sweat and sea spray, mingling with the pungent aroma of stale provisions. Cramped quarters offered little respite from the relentless sway of the ship, as passengers jostled for space on makeshift bunks or huddled together on the hard wooden floors. Life aboard the Garrick proved to be a tumultuous yet transformative experience for Sean O'Malley. As the ship cut through the vast expanse of the Atlantic Ocean, Sean found himself swept up in a whirlwind of activity and camaraderie, forging bonds that would shape the course of his journey in ways he never could have imagined. Amidst the throngs of fellow passengers, Sean crossed paths with a young boy named Michael O'Connell, a spirited soul with eyes that sparkled with a mixture of innocence and resilience. At just 10 years old, Michael had already endured more hardship and loss than most could bear. His immediate family, like so many others, had fallen victim to the ravages of the Great Famine, leaving him orphaned and alone in a world that seemed intent on breaking his spirit. Yet, despite the weight of grief and uncertainty that hung heavy upon his young shoulders, Michael faced the journey with a courage and determination that belied his tender years. With a heart full of hope and a longing to reunite with family across the sea, he clung to the promise of a brighter future on the distant shores of America. It was on a quiet afternoon aboard the Garrick, as the ship cut through the gentle swells of the Atlantic, Sean O'Malley and Michael found themselves seated side by side at a weathered wooden table in the cramped galley. Around them, the low murmur of conversation mingled with the rhythmic creaking of the ship's timbers, creating a soothing backdrop to the monotony of life at sea. As they unwrapped their meager rations for the day, a handful of dry biscuits and a small portion of salted beef, Sean couldn't help but notice the hunger that lingered in Michael's eyes, a hunger that mirrored the gnawing emptiness in his own stomach. Despite the meager offerings before them, Sean's heart ached at the thought of Michael going hungry, his young frame already worn thin by the trials of the journey. Sean felt protective of the poor, starving lad, and, with a sense of determination burning brightly within him, Sean handed a piece of hardtack from his own meager portion and held it out to Michael, a silent offering of solidarity and compassion in the face of adversity. For a moment, Michael hesitated, his eyes wide with surprise and disbelief at the unexpected gesture of kindness. But as he met Sean's gaze, he saw something reflected back at him, a glimmer of hope amidst the darkness, a reminder that even in the bleakest of times, there was still goodness to be found in the world. With a shy smile and a grateful nod, Michael accepted the offering, his fingers closing around the hardtack with a sense of reverence and gratitude. In that simple exchange, a bond was forged between them, a bond that transcended the barriers of age and circumstance, uniting them in a shared journey of resilience and hope. As they sat together in the quiet solitude of the galley, breaking bread and sharing stories beneath the watchful gaze of the ocean outside, Sean and Michael knew that they had found in each other not only companionship but also a source of strength and support that would carry them through the challenges that lay ahead. And as the ship sailed ever onward towards the distant shores of America, they took solace in the knowledge that no matter what trials awaited them on the horizon, they would face them together, bound by the unbreakable bonds of friendship and solidarity. Brought together by the shared bond of solitude and loss. In the cramped confines of the ship's quarters, they shared stories of their pasts and dreams for the future, finding solace and strength in each other's company amidst the vast and unforgiving expanse of the ocean. As the days turned into weeks and the horizon stretched out before them in an endless tapestry of blue, Sean and Michael stood side by side, united in the determination to overcome whatever challenges lay ahead. Together, they navigated the trials and tribulations of life aboard the Garrick, drawing courage and inspiration from the resilience of their friendship and the promise of a new beginning on the distant shores of America. For Sean and his fellow passengers, life aboard the coffin ship was a grueling test of endurance and resilience. Meager rations of dry bread and water provided scant sustenance, leaving stomachs perpetually empty and spirits flagging. Seasickness swept through the ranks like a plague, leaving many bedridden and weak. As the days stretched into weeks, the monotony of life at sea blurred into a ceaseless cycle of hardship and uncertainty. Storms lashed the ship with fury, sending towering waves crashing against its time-worn hull. Yet, amidst the chaos and despair, a sense of camaraderie emerged among the passengers, forged in the crucible of shared adversity. But the worst of the journey was yet to come. A shadow of illness began to descend upon the passengers of the Garrick. Typhus, a dreaded disease that thrived in the cramped and unsanitary conditions of the ship, spread like wildfire through the ranks, claiming victims with merciless efficiency. Among those who fell ill was Michael O'Connell, the spirited young boy whose resilience had inspired Sean O'Malley from the moment they met. Despite his best efforts to care for his friend, Sean watched helplessly as Michael's condition worsened with each passing day, his once bright eyes dulled by fever and delirium. As the ship's crew scrambled to contain the outbreak and tend to the sick and dying, Sean remained steadfast at Michael's side, offering what little comfort and solace he could in the face of overwhelming despair. But despite his best efforts, he knew that there was little he could do to save his friend from the cruel grip of the disease that ravaged his body. In the quiet hours before dawn, as the ship sailed on through the darkness towards an uncertain fate, Michael O'Connell drew his final breath, his frail form succumbing to the relentless onslaught of typhus. With a heavy heart and tears streaming down his cheeks, Sean held his friend's hand in a silent farewell, his grief mingling with a sense of profound loss that threatened to consume him. As Michael's lifeless body was consigned to the depths of the ocean, Sean stood on the deck of the Garrick, his eyes fixed on the distant horizon as he grappled with the magnitude of the tragedy that had befallen them. In the midst of the vast expanse of the Atlantic, surrounded by the vastness of the ocean and the unyielding march of time, he felt a profound sense of loneliness and isolation that echoed the emptiness in his heart. Michael O'Connell's death hit the 16-year-old Sean hard. Michael had reminded Sean of his younger brother, also named Michael, and the death of his new and now departed friend reminded Sean of the death of his mother Mary the year before. But even as he mourned the loss of his friend, Sean knew that Michael's spirit would live on in the memories they had shared and the bond that had united them in life and death. And as the ship sailed ever onward towards the distant shores of America, he vowed to honor Michael's memory by carrying on in his stead, drawing strength from the lessons he had learned and the love that had sustained them through the darkest of times. He had also promised the young boy before his passing to find Michael's uncle, James O'Connell, to let him know of the fate of that befell his poor nephew. Despite the hardships they faced, Sean and his fellow travelers clung to the hope of a better life awaiting them on the distant shores of America. With each sunrise that painted the horizon in hues of pink and gold, they found solace in the promise of a new beginning, determined to weather the storms that lay ahead and carve out a brighter future for themselves and their loved ones. As the ship carrying Sean O'Malley and his fellow passengers finally docked in the bustling port of Boston, a wave of anticipation swept through the weary travelers. After weeks of enduring the cramped confines and tumultuous seas of the Atlantic, the sight of solid ground beneath their feet was a welcome relief. As Sean stepped off the gangplank and onto the bustling quayside, he was met with a cacophony of sights and sounds that assaulted his senses. The air was alive with the shouts of dockworkers and the clang of metal against metal as cargo was unloaded from the ship. The bustling activity of the port was a stark contrast to the stillness of the ocean that had surrounded them for so long. Sean thought to himself, "There's probably work to be found here at the docks." Navigating through the throngs of people, Sean and his fellow passengers made their way towards the customs and immigration checkpoint, where they awaited inspection by officials tasked with ensuring their entry into the country. As Sean stood in line, his heart raced with a mixture of excitement and apprehension, the weight of his decision to leave Ireland and start anew in America pressing heavily upon him. After what felt like an eternity, Sean finally cleared customs and made his way out of the cavernous pavilion. Seeing the friends and family awaiting the disembarked passengers and carrying his and Michael's little bag of belongings and a small rocking horse that Michael's father had carved for him, Sean started calling for Michael's uncle, James O'Connell. James was nowhere to be seen, but as the ship arrived a day early, Sean would have to return again tomorrow to find him. Sean turned back again to the docks and asked one of the workers if there was work to be found. The grizzled young man merely grunted and pointed to a tall man with a furrowed brow who was barking orders at two other men in the distance. Sean approached the man, introduced himself, and quickly secured employment, after the man had a good look up and down the young Sean. As luck would have it, as the man was down a few men, not that he'd necessarily consider an Irishman otherwise. Jobs were plentiful, but not for most Irish in America. The man's name was Richard Gates, Sean's new boss at the docks. As Sean stepped out into the streets of Boston, his eyes wide with wonder at the bustling metropolis that lay before him. The sights, sounds, and smells of the city enveloped him, a vibrant tapestry of culture and opportunity that seemed to stretch out before him in all directions. With a sense of purpose driving him forward, Sean set out to explore his new surroundings, his footsteps echoing against the cobblestone streets as he took in the sights and sounds of his adopted homeland. The first few hours in Boston were a whirlwind of excitement and possibility, as Sean allowed himself to be swept up in the energy of the city and the promise of a new beginning. As he wandered through the bustling streets, Sean couldn't help but feel a sense of awe at the sheer magnitude of the world that lay before him. With each passing moment, he felt himself growing more and more confident in his decision to embark on this journey, determined to seize the opportunities that awaited him in this vibrant and dynamic city. As Sean O'Malley navigated the bustling streets of Boston in search of shelter, he found solace and support in the arms of his fellow Irish immigrants when he came upon an Irish pub and walked into the bar. Drawn together by a shared heritage and a common desire for a better life, the Irish had formed a tight-knit community that served as a beacon of hope amidst the unfamiliarity of their new surroundings. He ordered a Guinness and asked the barkeep, John, as he would later find out, if he knew of any boarding houses nearby. There were, and John suggested one run by a kindly Irish widow who took the young Sean in as one of her own. As the barkeep and Sean were talking, Sean told him that he had just found a job down at the docks. Upon this, John turned and called over another man whom he introduced as Liam, who was also a dock worker under Richard Gates' gang. 2 new friends, a place to stay, and a new job. Not bad for his first day in America, and a Guinness no less. Sean bid goodnight to his new friends at O'Sullivan's pub for the quaint boarding house located just a stone's throw away from the bustling docks. Peggy's a good woman, John remarked, his eyes twinkling with warmth and sincerity. As Sean left the bar, "She'll take good care of you, laddie." Sean set out into the cool night air, his footsteps echoing against the cobblestone streets as he made his way towards Peggy Mallory's boarding house. The journey was short but fraught with anticipation, each step bringing him closer to the promise of a warm bed and a welcoming hearth. And tomorrow, his first day at the docks. As he approached the boarding house, Sean's gaze fell upon the sturdy brick facade and flickering gas lamps that cast a soft glow upon the entrance. With a sense of trepidation mingled with excitement, he knocked and pushed open the door and stepped inside, his senses assailed by the comforting scent of home-cooked meals and the sound of laughter echoing through the halls. And there, standing at the threshold to greet him, was Peggy Mallory, a woman of strength and grace whose presence seemed to fill the room with warmth and light. With a gentle smile and a twinkle in her eye, Peggy welcomed Sean into her home, her voice laced with kindness and hospitality as she offered him a place to rest his weary head. But behind Peggy's warm demeanor lay a tale of hardship and resilience, a story that spoke to the depths of her character and the indomitable spirit that had carried her through life's trials and tribulations. Widowed at a young age when her husband, Francis, perished in Egypt on an ill-fated expedition with Henry Windsor Villiers Stewart, Peggy had been left to fend for herself in a world that seemed intent on testing her resolve. Yet, with unwavering determination and a fierce sense of independence, Peggy had forged ahead, seizing the opportunity presented to her by Francis's benefactor to start anew in America. With the tidy sum she had received, she had purchased the boarding house and transformed it into a haven for weary travelers and wayward souls, offering them not just a roof over their heads, but a sense of belonging and community in a world that often felt cold and unforgiving. And as Sean settled into his new home at Peggy Mallory's boarding house, he couldn't help but feel a sense of gratitude for the kindness and generosity of this remarkable woman who had opened her doors and her heart to him in his time of need. In Peggy, he had found not just a landlady, but a friend, a beacon of hope and compassion in a world that seemed increasingly dark and uncertain. As the clock struck 8, the gentle aroma of freshly brewed tea wafted through the halls of Peggy Mallory's boarding house, beckoning Sean and her other 4 boarders to gather in the cozy parlor for an evening of warmth and companionship. With a twinkle in her eye and a smile playing at the corners of her lips, Peggy welcomed her guests with open arms, her voice filled with warmth and hospitality as she invited them to join her for a cup of tea. As they settled into their seats around the crackling fire, Peggy began to regale her guests with tales of her late husband, Francis, and the ill-fated expedition to Egypt that had ultimately claimed his life. With a heavy heart and a sense of sadness lingering in the air, she spoke of Francis's passion for adventure and exploration, his dreams of uncovering ancient treasures and unlocking the mysteries of the past. But as Peggy's words turned to Henry Windsor Villiers Stewart, the man who had led and funded the expedition, her tone took on a note of reverence and gratitude. Henry Windsor Villiers Stewart was more than just a benefactor to Peggy and Francis. He was a man of principle and integrity, a staunch supporter of Catholic emancipation in Ireland and a champion of justice and equality for all. Born into a prominent Catholic family with a long and storied history, Henry Windsor Villiers Stewart had inherited a sense of duty and responsibility to his fellow man from an early age. Throughout his life, he had fought tirelessly for the rights of Catholics in Ireland, advocating for political reform and social justice in the face of entrenched prejudice and discrimination. It was this spirit of activism and compassion that had led Henry Windsor Villiers Stewart to let a young and inquisitive Francis, a farmhand, join him in the expedition to Egypt, seeing it not just as a chance for adventure and discovery, but as an opportunity to further the cause of Catholic emancipation and advance the cause of justice and equality for all, one young Irishman at a time. And though Francis's journey had ended in tragedy, Peggy took solace in the knowledge that his legacy lived on in the hearts and minds of those who had been touched by his kindness and generosity. With a silent toast to the memory of her late husband and the noble ideals for which he had fought, Peggy raised her cup of tea in a silent salute to Henry Windsor Villiers Stewart and the enduring legacy of hope and justice that he had left behind. Peggy's living room grandfather clock had just struck 11. Mary had mesmerized her guests for nearly 3 hours now. Sean was completely enraptured by the story but knew he'd be best getting to bed for his first day of work tomorrow. Sean politely took his leave for the evening, and as he turned to the stairs in his room, Peggy yelled to him, "You're a good young lad. Remember, you're not alone anymore." Sean stopped on the step, started to cry, ran down and gave Peggy a kiss on the cheek and ran back to bed. Peggy woke Sean and the other boarders early that day for some breakfast, but before Sean got to the table, Peggy gently tugged at his arm and escorted him to the pantry, where, on the table, was a half-eaten turkey. Peggy scolded Sean. "Now I know you're a good boy, Sean, and went straight to bed last night. But I think you brought some wee folk with you by the looks of the pantry. They had a grand feast last night." I woke to a commotion and saw one sitting at the table. As Peggy Mallory furrowed her brow in concern over the mysterious disappearance of her turkey from the pantry, Sean O'Malley couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt weighing heavily on his conscience. Could it be possible that a mischievous leprechaun had indeed stowed away in his bag of belongings from Ireland, as Peggy suspected? With a sense of trepidation, Sean took a deep breath and prepared to reveal the truth to Peggy, bracing himself for her reaction. "Miss Mallory," Sean began, his voice tinged with a mixture of apprehension and sincerity, "I believe I may have some insight into the matter of your missing turkey. You see, back in Ireland, I had the pleasure of befriending a group of leprechauns who resided near my village of Glenmore. They were mischievous little creatures, to be sure, but they meant no harm and often brought joy and laughter to our community." As Peggy's eyes widened in astonishment at Sean's revelation, he continued with a sense of urgency, eager to set the record straight. "Now, I haven't seen a leprechaun in my rucksack, but it's entirely possible that one may have found its way into my belongings during my journey to America. They have a way of sneaking about undetected, you see." Taking a deep breath, Sean launched into the tale of the treaty that had been forged between the villagers of Glenmore and the king of the Kerry County leprechauns, the great Shannon Cormac himself, a wise and just ruler. When Glenmore had approached the king after a surge of distrust and commotion broke out between the two camps, with a promise of détente and a pact that had ensured peace and harmony between their two worlds for generations in perpetuity. In exchange for our promise not to impede their free movement within County Kerry, nor to capture them or take their gold, the leprechauns agreed to cease their pranks on the townsfolk and become respected members of our community, Sean explained, his voice filled with reverence for the ancient pact that had bound their fates together. "And so, Miss Mallory, I believe it is entirely possible that a leprechaun may have found its way into your pantry in search of a bit of mischief and a taste of your delicious turkey. But fear not, for they mean no harm, and I'm sure they will return what they have taken once they've had their fill." As Peggy listened intently to Sean's tale, a sense of wonder and awe washed over her, mingled with a newfound respect for the ancient traditions and customs of their homeland. And as the fire crackled merrily in the hearth and the strains of laughter echoed through the parlor, Sean couldn't help but feel a sense of relief knowing that he had finally laid Peggy's suspicions to rest and reaffirmed the bonds of friendship and trust that bound them together. On his first day at the bustling docks of Boston, Sean O'Malley found himself thrust into a world of chaos and commotion, where the cacophony of shouts and the clang of metal against metal filled the air. It was a far cry from the quiet hills of County Kerry, but Sean embraced the hustle and bustle of his new surroundings with a sense of determination and resolve. As he made his way through the throngs of workers, Sean caught sight of his friend Liam, a fellow Irish immigrant who had arrived in Boston the year before him. Liam was a seasoned veteran of the docks, his weather-beaten face and calloused hands bearing testament to the trials and tribulations he had endured in his time in America. With a warm smile and a firm handshake, Liam welcomed Sean into the fold, offering words of encouragement and advice as they prepared to tackle the challenges of their new environment together. Sean felt a surge of gratitude for Liam's friendship, knowing that he would need all the support he could get in the days and weeks ahead. But their camaraderie was soon overshadowed by the presence of Luther, a grizzled young man with a chip on his shoulder and a fierce disdain for immigrants, especially those of Irish descent. Sean had encountered Luther the day before, when he had mustered the courage to ask him for work, only to be met with a cold glare and a dismissive grunt. As Sean made his way through the ranks of workers, introducing himself to his new colleagues with a friendly smile and a firm handshake, he couldn't shake the feeling of unease that gnawed at the pit of his stomach. When he finally reached Luther, the young man's hostility was palpable, his eyes narrowing with contempt as he spat on Sean's shoe before turning away without a word. Stunned by the suddenness of the attack, Sean could only stand there in shock as Liam grabbed his shoulder and shook his head with a knowing look. "Pay Luther no mind," Liam muttered, his voice tinged with resignation. "There's no coin in it. Luther doesn't like us Irish." With a heavy heart and a sense of foreboding weighing heavily upon him, Sean knew that his journey in America would be fraught with challenges and obstacles, both seen and unseen. But with Liam by his side and the determination burning brightly within him, he was ready to face whatever trials lay ahead, confident in his ability to overcome adversity and carve out a place for himself in this new and unfamiliar world. Bonding over shared experiences and a mutual determination to succeed, Sean and Liam quickly formed a deep and lasting friendship. Together, they embarked on a journey of survival and perseverance, navigating the trials and tribulations of immigrant life in America with unwavering resolve and unwavering camaraderie. Through the support of his newfound friends and the resilience of his own spirit, Sean was able to overcome the obstacles that stood in his path and carve out a place for himself in this vibrant and dynamic city. As he settled into his new life in Boston, Sean knew that he had found not only a home but also a family in the tight-knit community of Irish immigrants who had welcomed him with open arms. As Sean O'Malley settled into life in Boston, he found himself drawn to the vibrant Irish community that thrived amidst the bustling streets of the city. After his arrival in Boston, Sean spent days looking to find James O'Connell, Michael's uncle, to tell James of the fate of his dearly departed nephew. He would often stand amongst the others waiting for passengers to disembark ships sailing from Ireland. He also inquired at some local pubs and with Peggy. Serendipity would reward him as he entered the Irish Aid Society that night. It was at an Irish Aid Society gathering, held in a grand hall adorned with green and gold decorations, that he first laid eyes on the captivating Bridget Sullivan, a vision of beauty and grace who stole his heart with a single glance. Their meeting unfolded amidst a flurry of activity and laughter, as Sean stumbled awkwardly into Bridget's path while attempting to balance a tray of steaming cottage pie, his favorite dish, and a frothy pint of Guinness as another guest bumped into him, causing him to drop his plate and lightly step on Bridget's right foot. With a sheepish frown and a twinkle in his eye, he apologized profusely for his clumsiness, his cheeks flushed with embarrassment as Bridget's laughter rang out like music in his ears. "No harm done, lad," Bridget replied with a warm smile, her eyes sparkling with amusement as she reached out to steady the tray in Sean's trembling hands. "You must be new around here. I haven't seen you at any of our gatherings before." With a nervous chuckle, Sean nodded, his heart racing with excitement at the prospect of getting to know this enchanting woman who had captured his attention so completely. "That I am," he admitted, his voice tinged with a hint of Irish charm. "Just arrived from the old country about a month ago. Still finding my way around these parts, your foot notwithstanding." He offered to get another plate of cottage pie for himself and Bridget, and she accepted. As they chatted animatedly amidst the throng of fellow revelers, Sean felt a sense of kinship and connection blossoming between them, a bond that transcended the boundaries of time and space and drew them together with an irresistible force. And as the evening wore on and the laughter flowed freely, Sean couldn't help but feel as though he had found a kindred spirit in Bridget Sullivan, a soulmate whose presence illuminated his world with warmth and joy. Bridget Sullivan's journey to Boston was a tale of resilience and determination, fueled by the hope of a brighter future in the land of opportunity. Originating from the verdant landscapes of County Cork, Bridget ventured across the Atlantic Ocean seeking better prospects, leaving behind the familiarity of her homeland for the bustling streets of Boston. Arriving in the city several years before Sean's arrival, Bridget, 18 that night she had met Sean, encountered the harsh realities of immigrant life, yet she refused to yield to adversity, taking on various jobs to sustain herself in the unfamiliar urban landscape. Despite the challenges she faced, Bridget drew strength from her familial connections within the Irish community, particularly her uncle, James O'Connell, a respected figure known for his unwavering support of fellow immigrants. James had been a guiding light for Bridget, offering both practical assistance and invaluable wisdom as she navigated the complexities of life in Boston. She had taken up residence with James upon arrival to Boston. It was through James that Bridget had become involved with the Irish Aid Society, finding solace and camaraderie in the gatherings that brought together members of the Irish diaspora. And so, amidst the flickering candlelight and the strains of traditional Irish music, Sean and Bridget embarked on a journey of love and laughter, a journey that would take them to the very depths of their hearts and beyond, where their souls would intertwine in an eternal dance of passion and devotion. And as they shared their hopes and dreams beneath the starry sky, Sean knew in his heart that he had found the love of a lifetime in the arms of the enchanting Bridget Sullivan. As Sean and Bridget exchanged stories and shared memories of the shared homeland, the conversation inevitably turned to Sean's connection with James and his search for the revered figure within the Irish community. With a sense of serendipity hanging in the air, Sean's quest for information intertwined with Bridget's own journey, setting the stage for a blossoming romance that would transcend the boundaries of time and circumstance. And as they delved deeper into the shared history, Sean and Bridget discovered that their meeting was not merely a chance encounter but rather a twist of fate that would shape the course of their lives forever. The chance encounter that night of Sean and Bridget changed the trajectory of both of their lives. As the evening air grew crisp and cool, Bridget Sullivan extended a gentle invitation to Sean O'Malley, inviting him to accompany her on the walk home and meet her uncle, James O'Connell. With a mixture of excitement and nervous anticipation coursing through his veins, Sean eagerly accepted, his heart fluttering with the prospect of getting to know Bridget's beloved family member. As they strolled through the dimly lit streets of Boston, their footsteps echoing against the cobblestones, Sean and Bridget exchanged stories and shared laughter, their conversation flowing effortlessly as they forged a deeper connection with each passing moment. Sean found himself captivated by Bridget's infectious energy and warmth, his admiration for her growing with each step they took together. As they approached the modest brick building that Bridget called home, Sean's heart raced with anticipation, his nerves tingling with excitement at the prospect of meeting James O'Connell, a man whose reputation preceded him as a pillar of the Irish community in Boston. Stepping through the doorway, Sean was greeted by the warm glow of lamplight and the sound of muffled voices drifting from the parlor. Bridget led him into the cozy room, where James O'Connell sat by the fireside, his weathered features illuminated by the flickering flames. With a warm smile, Bridget introduced Sean to her uncle, her voice filled with pride and affection as she spoke of the man who had been a guiding light in her life. Sean's eyes met James's, and in that instant, he felt a sense of kinship and respect wash over him, an unspoken bond forged in the shared experiences of their Irish heritage. As they settled into conversation, Sean recounted the story of his journey to America and his encounter with Bridget at the Irish Aid Society, his words painting a vivid picture of the trials and tribulations he had faced along the way. But as Sean relayed the tale of his search for James, his voice faltered, and his eyes filled with tears, his emotions raw and unguarded as he told James of the fate of his beloved nephew, Michael, who had passed away on the Garrick before Michael had ever the opportunity to meet his new homeland, America. And as James listened to Sean's story, his heart heavy with sorrow, he could not help but be moved by Sean's courage and determination in the face of adversity, as well as how Sean took care of Michael and how Michael had reminded Sean of his younger brother, who shared the same name as James' nephew. James reached out a comforting hand, offering Sean words of encouragement and support, his voice filled with compassion and understanding. In that moment, as Sean looked into James's eyes, he knew that he had found not just a friend, but a mentor, a wise and compassionate soul whose guidance would help him navigate the challenges of immigrant life in America. And as they shared a heartfelt embrace, Sean felt a sense of gratitude wash over him, knowing that he had found a home and a family in the warm embrace of Bridget Sullivan and her beloved uncle, James O'Connell. It wasn't long before Bridget and Sean were wed, a few months to be exact. Sean was 17 now and had saved enough money for Sean's family to come to America for the auspicious wedding. Sean's father, Patrick, and his younger brother, Michael, made the journey, while his younger sister, Catherine, was married some months before and was with child. Sean's sister Annie was another victim of the Great Famine, much like Sean's mother Mary before her. Sean had scrimped these many months, but it was not enough to save the fate of Annie or his beloved Glenmore. Thankfully, Patrick and Michael would be immigrating to America and would be staying with James, Bridget, and Sean in James' modest but well-appointed brownstone. James had even offered Sean a desk job at his small bookstore, which would prove to be a salvation to the erstwhile and avid reading Sean. The Catholic wedding of Sean and Bridget was a joyous celebration of love and unity, a testament to the enduring bond that had blossomed between them amidst the trials and tribulations of immigrant life in Boston. Set against the backdrop of Holy Cross, the grandeur of the church echoed the magnitude of the love that Sean and Bridget shared, a love that had transcended time and distance to unite them in holy matrimony. As they exchanged vows before their family and friends, Sean and Bridget stood hand in hand at the altar, their hearts overflowing with happiness and gratitude for the journey that had brought them to this sacred moment. With tears of joy glistening in their eyes, they pledged their love and devotion to one another, promising to cherish and support each other through all the days of their lives. Among the guests gathered to witness their union were Liam, James O'Connell, and Sean's father, Patrick, and brother Michael, each one offering words of blessing and encouragement as Sean and Bridget embarked on this new chapter of their lives together. Even Richard Gates, Sean's former boss at the docks, had set aside his differences to attend the wedding, a gesture of reconciliation and goodwill that spoke volumes about the power of love to bridge divides. But amidst the joy and celebration, there were some notable absences. Luther, the grizzled labourer who harboured a deep-seated hatred for the Irish. Despite being invited to the wedding, Luther had chosen to stay away, his bitterness and prejudice casting a shadow over the joyous occasion. Other absences were felt more keenly. Sean's friend Michael, who passed away on the journey to America, and Sean's younger sister Annie, as well as Sean's mother, Mary. They were there in spirit amidst the joy and sorrow that filled Sean's heart that day. Before they left the church for the reception, Sean had stolen a moment to light candles for Michael, Annie, and his beloved mother, Mary. She was sure to be offering Sean and Bridget her blessings and love from heaven. Sean offered them a prayer and looked up to heaven with a tear in his eye and a smile on his face. This was certainly the end of one journey and the beginning of another. Following the ceremony, the newlyweds and the guests made their way to O'Sullivan's. Sean and Bridget knew that their love was a bond that could withstand any obstacle, a beacon of light shining brightly in the darkness, guiding them on their journey through life together. Amidst the lively music and raucous laughter, they raised their glasses in a toast to love and happiness, savoring the warmth and camaraderie of their friends and family gathered around them. A second toast was offered in honor of the guests who shared this moment with the bride and groom. A third was offered for one who could no longer share the warmth of those in attendance, for Sean's mother Mary. Sean openly cried upon raising the glass, and Bridget hugged her new husband. "We'll keep Mary's tale alive when we have children of our own," she told Sean, which allowed a smile on his face as they embraced once more with a kiss. Slauncher,